Welcome to the Backyard Vegetable and Herb Garden Show. This is Larry Stebbins, sometimes known as the Garden Father. Today's topic will be organic fertile soils and why that's a must for every garden. Now, first off, you want to ask yourself, what are organic soils? I mean, we hear a lot about that, and many of us have different ideas on what that is. But you know, Mother Nature uses only organic processes, and for example, when a tree sheds its leaves in the fall, they fall down into the ground and they decompose, and then those nutrients are returned to the soil for the plants to use for the following season. Chemicals are not used. But typically speaking, organic means any compound that has the molecule or the atom carbon in it. But to simplify it for us gardeners, it simply means that products we add to the soil came from previously living things. I like to look at it that if you were an earthworm in the soil, would you want to make your dinner out of chemicals, or would you like to make your dinner out of decomposing leaves and vegetable matter? I think the answer is obvious. Now let's discuss for a moment what really is a healthy soil and what does it look like? Well, when you look at it underneath a microscope, you may see things that are not visible to the naked eye. You know, all kinds of little organisms that live in there. But we do see larger things, and we see them in the soil. Earthworms, millipedes, centipedes, sow bugs, beetles, that sort of thing. And they all are living in balance, or hopefully they're living in balance. One thing eats another, and they provide nutrients to the soil when they defecate or when they die and decompose back into the soil. All these organisms living in the soil together are what we call a food web. For example, if you have organic debris, just decomposing leaf matter and vegetable matter, animal defecation, even dead animal bodies that are decaying, those tend to be eaten by other things, broken down into the soil into nutrients that the plants can use. For example, fungi, and the fungi might be eaten by things like mites and beetles in the soil, and then the beetles might be eaten by centipedes and so on and so forth. Or the organic debris could actually be decomposed by bacteria, which then, when the bacteria die, could be eaten by protozoans, small little unicellular organisms, or flies eat the organic debris, and the flies are eaten by frogs, or the organic debris is eaten by earthworms, sow bugs, and millipedes. All these together comprise the food web. Now, a healthy soil will be teeming with this life, and that is what we are trying to shoot for, because in these healthy, balanced food webs in the soil, we know that if we have that, it'll promote healthy plant growth. Plants will grow bigger, stronger, produce more fruit, and be more disease resistant because they're stronger and can fend them off. Now, you know when you're healthy, when you eat proper and exercise, get good sleep, and that sort of thing, that your body is capable of fending off some diseases better than if you were, eating an unhealthy diet, not exercising, and so on. So we want to do the same things for our soil, and that's what we're going to discuss today. Now, when you farm or garden, you're doing what is called extractive agriculture. That means you're pulling out products, things like corn and soybeans, tomatoes, whatever you're growing, and in doing so, you tend to remove nutrients in the soil. And that's why you need to add fertilizers back to your soil each and every year. See, Mother Nature doesn't do that. I mean, those fruit trees, if they were growing wild, those apples or whatever is growing wild out there will fall down into the soil and, decompose. Some will be eaten by animals and they'll defecate into the soil where they've eaten and so on and so forth. So they tend to add that right back to the soil. But with us gardeners and farmers, what we do is we pull out the product, and we are not as good at replenishing everything that is taken out. Now, I'm going to discuss here for a moment some of the main categories of the nutrients that are in the soil that we have to be conscious of. One are called macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and some are called secondary minerals like sulfur, magnesium, and calcium, and still others are called trace minerals. And we'll talk about that later, but there's a whole slew of those trace minerals like boron, chlorine, manganese, iron, zinc, copper, molybdenum, and so on and so forth. So all this may be swimming in your head, and you say, how could we possibly know how to bring those all back into the soil? Well, the thing is, you don't need to be a chemist to figure this thing out. The easiest way, and I mean the easiest way, is to make your own homemade compost. You're putting in things like fresh fruits and vegetable scraps, that you don't use, and you allow those to decompose in your compost pile. And doing so, it's like a multiple vitamin, mineral, nutrient pill, because you're putting so many different varieties of fruits and vegetables, scraps in there, and they break down and usually will give your plants what they need. The trouble is most households, including mine, can't produce enough compost just by the vegetables and fruit scraps that they generate throughout the year, so they have to supplement it by bringing in things from outside. Now let's talk about the macronutrients first: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, NPK. So what does that all mean? Well, when you see a bag of fertilizer and it says 10-5-5, what does that tell you? Well, it usually tells you that you have 10% nitrogen, 5% phosphorus, and 5% potassium in that bag. So it really tells you the strengths of the nutrients in there. The other remaining percentages, of course, are inert ingredients that are just added as fillers to help it disperse when you put it on your garden or lawn. Now, nitrogen is important, and let's discuss this just briefly. Nitrogen provides the leaves with growth. It helps provide it with the nutrients so the leaves can grow and get a nice green color. It helps develop the chlorophyll in the plant to do so. Phosphorus, or P stands for phosphorus, helps new roots grow, and of course it helps make seeds, fruits, and flowers, so it is much needed. And potassium, I kind of think of this as something that helps strengthen the plant. It helps the plant grow strong stems, resist diseases, resist drought. All of these are much needed, and they're needed in larger quantities than many of the other things in your soil. Now, what happens if they don't get enough of these macronutrients? Well, if they don't get enough nitrogen, the leaves will turn pale green and maybe even yellow and be undersized. Phosphorus, if it's in deficiencies, you'll see that the leaves will be a little red or yellow tinges in them, and sometimes the leaves even get distorted in their shape. And if the potassium is not in the proper quantities, the leaves usually get browned or die at the edges, or the stems get a little wilty. So all of these are extremely important. Now, if you were to buy just a bag of lawn fertilizer and you just see NPK on the label, it means that those are the 3 ingredients you're getting and basically nothing else. So of course, just like a diet, your plants need a healthy, well-rounded diet. So how do you get those other nutrients into your soil? Again, and I cannot stress this enough, the easiest way is good, well-rounded compost. Usually the stuff that you make at home is the best because you know what you're putting into your pile. Those secondary minerals like sulfur, magnesium, and calcium will be present in many of the vegetable and fruit skins and that sort of thing, perhaps even ground up eggshells if you're lacking in calcium and phosphorus and so on. They're found in those composted elements. But the one thing I have learned over the years is that I need to pay more attention to the trace minerals or the micronutrients that are in our soil, because those are things that aren't readily available in many types of fertilizers that you can find on the market. Even organic fertilizers don't seem to have enough. So I usually buy a product called Azomite, and it has a whole variety of trace minerals in it, and I add that to my garden as well. And that usually takes care of everything that I need. Okay, so most of us don't produce enough compost at home, and so what are we going to do? Well, I want to make it pretty simple. This is kind of a recipe that I use, and it's available locally, so you can find it, and I think it'll work well for most all gardens. So you have your soil there. It's looking a little hard, not really crumbly. You want to add a little friability or crumbliness to the soil, and you also want to add nutrients to the soil. So what do? Well, thankfully, the big box stores and many of our local garden shops will carry products that will help. What I like to do is I like this one product called Permagreen Pro Mushroom Compost. Now, it's never been used to grow mushrooms in it, but it could. And it's a good variety of all kind of mixes of things that I would add to the soil, along with other things that break up the clay nature or allow for a sandy soil to be able to absorb and hold more moisture when it rains or when you water. So I will get that Pro Permagreen Mushroom Compost and use that in my soil. And I will also get a couple other products, which of course is Azomite, which I mentioned, which are the trace minerals. And I will actually add a little extra fertilizer to the soil too, and that is usually a pelleted form of fertilizer. There's one locally available called Espoma, E-S-P-O-M-A. It's available at your garden shops or at your big box stores, and that is a good organic pelletized fertilizer that is a wide variety of things. It's like a multivitamin mineral added to the soil. Now, here are the amounts that I add to a 4-foot by 8-foot garden bed. Now, I have my soil in there already, but each fall I do it, or early spring if you can. I add 2 to 3 bags of the Pro Mushroom Compost blend. And these bags come in 2 cubic foot or 1.5 cubic foot bags. And what you would do is just add 2 to 3 of those bags to the soil, and that will do it. You'll also add 2 to 3 cups of the Azomite. It comes in a powder of trace minerals to the soil, to that 4x8 bed. And I will top it off with 4 cups of the pelleted organic Espoma pelletized fertilizer. Now that's it, and then I work that down 6 to 8, maybe even 10 inches into my garden beds, and my beds are now ready to plant. But wait, there is one more important thing that I do add to my soil, and this is extremely important. I add sugars. Now I know that sounds kind of strange, but you can just use, and I use organic cane sugar. You know, you can buy that at the stores. It's not expensive. And these sugar blends will actually increase the growth of the organisms in the soil that will break down much of the organic content that you've added. And that'll allow it to be readily available. I think of it as a sport drink for the microbes. You know, they eat the sugar, they grow, and then they start eating other things in the soil and break it all down. Now, the garden shops will have another product called dry molasses. And this is a good product. And this does have the sugars in it, and it is good. It's a little more expensive than just buying the plain cane sugar. But molasses has a few more ingredients in it, and they mix it with a grain product, so it's not liquid, it's pelletized, or it comes in a granular form, so it's easy to put on your garden. Either of those will be good, and I usually add probably about 4 cups of the sugars to a 4x8 bed, and if it's dry molasses, I'll double that amount because, again, some of it's mixed with grain products, so you want to get more sugars into the soil. So you do that, you keep your garden beds moist until you're ready to plant, and you'll have a great season. So our next podcast, we'll be discussing a little more on composting to get you guys ready so that you can be growing what we call black gold, best you can do for your garden. So this is Larry Stebbins, the Garden Father. Happy gardening.